Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel, Amateurs in Industry, NCAA Reform. My name is Amal Mapani. I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan and the student lead for this panel. I'd like to introduce to you today the panelists for the panel. First, we have Oliver Luck, the EVP at the NCAA, Mike McCann, legal analyst for Sports Illustrated and a professor of law at UNH, Jim Phillips, the vice president of athletics and recreation at Northwestern University, Rod Thorne, the president of basketball operations at the NBA, and then our moderator, Warren Zola, executive director at Boston College. We'll spend about 40 minutes of the panel and then leave 15 to 20 minutes at the end for audience Q&A. To ask and vote on questions, please go through the Sports SSAC15 app and enter your questions there. And with that, I'll hand it off to Warren. Thank you.
Thanks, Amal. And let me start off with thanking MIT, Jessica, and most importantly, the students working at a grad school at Boston College. I know how difficult it is to organize students to pull off an event, so kudos to all of you at Sloan for doing this. Thanks for coming. Obviously, we've got a lively topic, NCAA reform, and very excited about the panelists today. In fact, there was an article this morning posted online that listed the 5 most interesting panelists at the conference that you don't want to miss. And 2 of them are on this panel, Oliver and Michael. So you've got, and it's been a long time since I used an abacus, but I think that's 40% of the excitement at this conference or on this panel. I don't know what that means for Jim, Rod, and I, but we're thrilled.
We're finished.
Pardon?
I think we're finished before we've even started, Rod and I.
Fantastic. Mike and Oliver, we'll see you in 50 minutes. So the title of this panel is Amateurs or Industry, NCAA Reform. And I'm going to start off with a question for Jim. You're an athletic director, a vice president at Northwestern, a fantastic institution combining academics and athletics. But at what point during your career did the question of amateurism or industry enter into discussion? At one point did commercialization all of a sudden become a topic that you need to spend time as a professional in this industry?
Well, let me first echo some of your introductory comments and thank the folks at Sloan and all of the students that have put this terrific conference together. It's my first opportunity, thanks to Daryl Morey from the Rockets, who's also a Northwestern grad, but it's a spectacular professional development and career development opportunity. So I say thanks, and thanks for affording me the opportunity to come from Chicago. Relative to the question, I think the moment you step on a college campus, you have to understand that there is a piece of what we do each and every day that is the business side of sport. The commercialization question is never rung louder, I think, in the environment. But I think one of my hopes as we look to maybe have a recorrection or a recalibration of college athletics coming up, and you've seen a lot of movement over the last year, but as we go into the future, is this solidification of what we want the college experience to be, the academic piece central to all of that. And I think it's really a tremendous opportunity for us because there's so much debate and so much conversation about it. But I think the ground floor continues to be and needs to be what's the academic experience for our college student athletes.
And clearly, I mean, the purpose of athletics on a college campus, at least my understanding, is it teaches transformative skills unavailable to recreate in the classroom. So you've got an opportunity to provide a learning experience for a bunch of students who learn about winning and losing and teamwork and dedication in ways that you can't teach at a podium in a classroom. But clearly, things have changed a little bit with the business of college sports. And whether it's back when the Board of Regents versus NCAA case came out, removing the restriction on a number of games that college football teams could be on television. Clearly, in the past 20 years or so, we've had a migration towards a little bit more of a discussion of the business side on behalf of the students. And certainly the last couple of years, it's exploded, whether it was the article written by Taylor Branch in The Shame of College Sports in 2010 or 2011. This discussion has moved from the sports pages to the front page of the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Time Magazine. Given that environment, I'll turn to Oliver. You had a fantastic job, athletic director, West Virginia. And given the maelstrom surrounding the NCAA, what was it that led you to decide, I'd like to join forces with the NCAA, become their executive vice president for regulatory affairs, a newly created position, and engage in this recalibration, as Jim says?
Sure. A couple of things. First, I hope Mike and I live up to the lofty expectations that you've set for us, number one. But number two, I took this position because of a couple of reasons. Number one, I love college athletics. I love what our enterprise does. I love the fact that through college athletics, there's $2.8 billion of scholarships every year given to young men and women that help them, receive access to higher education. I love the lessons that we all learn, and I love the fact that people care about college athletics. The other reason I took this position beyond my love for the enterprise is we're in a very challenging situation, obviously. That's why we need reform. And I think having been a former college athlete and having a couple of kids that went through as college athletes, having been on the professional side, where I really sort of cut my teeth in terms of how I view professional sports and amateur sports, I think I can help. But I absolutely believe that this enterprise is worth keeping. Nobody else in the world does college athletics like we do. There's great universities in Europe, South America, Central America, Asia. They don't do college athletics like we do. It's very special. And I think it's certainly worth fighting for. That's one of the reasons why I decided to join the NCAA. I think it's a better platform to try to save what's good about college athletics, but also reform where we need to reform.
Rod, you've been with the NBA, is it 51 years you mentioned?
51 years.
50, so you're just getting the hang of it. So as you're working for a clearly professional enterprise, generating $9-10 billion a year or so, are you watching college athletics from that vantage point and saying they're getting closer to what we are? What's your perspective from a professional league as you watch the NCAA go through some of its growing pains, changes, and some of the revenue that's been coming to that league, that conference?
Well, Warren, we watch everything. That's part of what we do at the NBA, and particularly the NCAA. And there are a lot of things that we can work together. Mr. Emmert has had conversations with Adam Silver since Adam became the commissioner of the NBA. Just this past Monday, representatives from my department met with the NCAA in Indianapolis about health issues, about ways that we can grow the sport, ways that we can get closer together. But particularly what the NBA is now focusing on the health of our players. We've had a lot of star players get hurt this year, and even though the injury level is no higher than it's been in recent years, we're still very concerned about it. We're still very concerned about playing too many games, not as far as 82 games, but as far as 4 games in 5 nights, as far as back-to-backs. And through our conversations among ourselves and also with the NCAA, we are looking to, as I said, to look into a lot of different areas that we have commonality. Referees, for instance, rules. The college rules and the pro rules have gotten a lot closer, in the last several years. And so there are just so many different ways that ourselves and the NCAA can work together to make sure that basketball grows and that the sport will only get bigger. So we're looking to work as closely as we can.
So, but one of the clear distinctions between the NBA and all the other professional leagues and intercollegiate athletics is that when the NBA goes to make decisions, they've got another body,
right,
the National Basketball Players Association, the players who have a union, who then can come to the table and you can negotiate the terms of engagement for your industry. So you've got a collective bargaining agreement that's 400 and some odd pages long, collectively bargained. At an unnamed institution recently, there was a movement by some outside forces and some students to talk about the rights of college athletes to unionize. I'll turn this question to Mike in terms of what are your thoughts in terms of a little bit of the legality, but also what that might mean for college athletics moving forward.
Sure. So there is, as you noted, Warren, a challenge by players at Northwestern University, particularly football players, to be declared employees under the National Labor Relations Act. And if they were to become employees, the presumption is that they would then unionize and try to enter into some type of collective bargaining relationship with the university. But that's not necessarily what would happen. Even if they're declared employees, there's a separate vote where the players actually have to vote to unionize. So that it could turn out that they're declared employees by the National Labor Relations Board, but the players choose not to unionize. They would then be presumably employees, but they could also be temporary employees. It gets complicated. But the importance of that decision, and we're waiting on the decision, it will likely come later this year. The vote will be some combination of 5 votes. It could turn out to be 3-2, depending upon what the National Labor Relations Board does. But the real impact of that decision is if players are declared employees, other private universities would be able, student athletes at other private universities would be able to rely on that. So it could turn out that students at your school, Boston College, and other schools that are private would then rely on that, potentially vote on unionizing. The complication, though, is that will it only be football players unionize? Would the many other athletes, student athletes at the school, what's going to happen to them? And will some not want to be part of the union? Do some feel pressure to join the union? There are a lot of difficult, nuanced issues. It's sort of been cast as a bright line, are they employees or not? But it's much more complicated than that. And the impact of whatever is decided could have consequences I think are not necessarily foreseeable.
So clearly, and I think Jim had a perfect term, college sports needs a recalibration, right? We need to change. And we've got legal cases that are out there, some of which will be decided sooner rather than later. Some of them are the Jenkins case, talking about whether or not this scholarship at all, even with the cost of attendance, is a restriction of trade, antitrust violation, and we'd have open markets. Others, like the NLRB case, could be decided sooner. But assuming that we're all in agreement that there'll be some change coming to the NCAA, what are some of the best options you think that we can go down so that we don't lose this ship and head towards a direction where nobody likes the outcome? Jim, I'm not asking where we're going to be in 10 years. I think I'll come to that later. But what are some of the best options that are before us now that we should be paying attention to?
So I would say all of this debate is really healthy. I just really believe we can get college athletics to a better place, whether it's the conversation about unionization, whether it's the Kessler case, whether it's lots of different things that are in the infrastructure. In the end, I think it is, what do we want college athletics to be? So you've seen lots of reform, and Oliver can talk about some of the new legislation from an NCAA standpoint. But over the last 12 months, you've seen some pretty holistic changes when it's, you get to unlimited meals for student athletes. You get the full cost of attendance that will be triggered in August. The 4-year grants, some of those types of things, the student athlete health and welfare. But I think it's a broader discussion, back to my earlier statement, about where do we want and what do we want college athletics to be. So what are our practice and playing seasons look like? What do the time demands look like? What does initial eligibility look like? What does progress towards degree look like? If we really believe in the academic component of that, then we really need to tighten that up. We really do, because when you look at the time demands of student athletes, when you look at the length of seasons, I think those are questions to be asked. Are we playing too many games? Is the practice and playing seasons too long? Are we taking our student athletes, away from some of the basic experiences that college students across lots of generations have been able to encounter and experience? And I really believe that's healthy. That needs to be talked about. It needs to be talked about across divisional lines. It needs to be talked about across institutional lines, conference alignments. But part of this thing is having an open discussion. And that's part of what you saw last week. We came off of some Big Ten meetings where we talked about maybe there needs to be a year of readiness. Now, I'm not sure whether that's the right thing or not. We have to study it and look at it. But what it is it's a start and a call to having a conversation. so that we can get our hands around what is this, again, not to overuse it, what does this recalibration of college athletics look like?
I think it's exciting in the sense that for a long time, I think the NCAA and many leading it sort of shunned those discussions, or they were held behind closed doors. And Jim, newly appointed chairman of the NCAA Division I Council, you're going to have a say in ensuring we have those conversations. Oliver, your background, your position, you're going to ensure that these discussions continue. From your perspective at the NCAA level, I know that it's over 1,000 institutions at the NCAA level, only 300 at Division I, only 65 in the Power 5 conferences, a huge disparity in terms of needs and wants. How is it, from your perspective at the NCAA level, that you're going to try to engage in this dialogue and then enact meaningful change?
It's a big tent in Division I, right? It's 351 schools, and there's the big football powerhouses like Alabama or others, all the way down to smaller schools without football. So clearly a big tent. There's a lot more that binds us together than tears us apart. This debate is going on right now, right? It's a national conversation, as often you hear out of Washington, D.C., but it's going on right now, and it's a very vibrant debate. And it really goes back to what Miles Brand, former NCAA president, former president of Indiana University, and a philosophy professor. Miles Brand used to say that amateurism is a social construct, right? It means different things in different eras as we go through. There's a continuum, and clearly, right now we're in an era, Jim has pointed this out, we're in an era where we're much more focused on the health and the welfare of the student athlete. There was a time, Rod, when you were in school when student athletes on scholarship couldn't take Pell Grant money. That changed. Right. Nobody got upset about that. It was the right thing to do. And now there's a lot of student athletes in my campus, well, our campus, Rod and I both went to West Virginia. But as I left our campus...
Can you believe Oliver left West Virginia to go with the NCAA?
I left God's country. But at our campus when I left, I think we had 141 of our student athletes on some sort of Pell Grant. So that didn't blow up amateurism. So as we move down this continuum and do more for our student athletes, I think that the American public, and they're engaged in this debate, I think the American public will ultimately accept what that new social construct is. It's amateurism for the 21st century.
But I mean, so the definition of amateurism is continually evolving. Right? So at one point we had, this is what it is, we're not going to pay. And it's evolved. So, we've been paying and compensating, at least at the Division I level, athletes for a long time. It was called an athletic scholarship. Now there's been movement, and it was recently passed that we're allowed, or the Power 5 schools are going to offer cost of attendance, which is $2,000 to $4,000 beyond the athletic scholarship. Right. And there's debate, well, is that still amateurism, and where is that line drawn? Because it seems difficult, at least from a legal perspective, right? How does athletic scholarship and $3,000, that's okay, but if we go to 5 or 6 or 10 or free markets, now it's not okay.
Well, just keep in mind the full cost of attendance, which was passed by the autonomous group, and a number of non-autonomy Division I schools will do it. That is a federal calculation, from the school's financial aid office, and that is really the true cost of attending college. I would argue that we've been under-resourcing, if you will, our student athletes over the last 50 years because, as we all know, those of us who played in college, come sort of early April, you're out of money. And you can't work because you're in school, et cetera. So I would argue we've been under-resourcing, under-supporting our student athletes, and this cost of attendance sort of remedies that.
I certainly agree with the underfunding, but one of the opponents to the cost of attendance was an unnamed institution, again, that voted against that at the autonomous schools. And I think
that's not my institution, right?
That's another unnamed institution.
And I think a valid point was, doesn't that allow institutions to do a little bit of fuzzy math on what their calculation is for their cost of attendance? Whereas yet another place where a state school, there's no way that Alabama and Auburn might have different costs of attendance.
Well, if that's the case, I think that's rather an indictment, quote unquote, of a financial aid office, because the Higher Education Act of, 1972 or something, requires every school, public and private, to provide the federal government with that cost of attendance delta. And that was done because it was really a guide for parents to to understand how much money do you have to borrow to send your son or daughter to this unnamed institution. So I think that's not an athletics issue, that's really an issue that emanates from everybody's financial aid offices.
Right, let me turn back to you in professional leagues. When you think about the football, men's basketball, which is primarily the students that we're talking about that are generating a lot of revenue for their colleges, their conferences, and the NCAA, many of them have aspirations of going to the pros. Probably a disproportionate number of them think they'll make it, but that's a separate issue in a different panel. But one of the concerns has been that for each sport, there are different rules that are imposed upon those students or those athletes based on collective bargaining that have an age eligibility limit that say you can go pro at X, right? In the NBA, it's 1 year out of high school. Right. In football, it's 3 years. In hockey, you can be drafted once you hit 18. The team will retain your rights, and you can leave at any point during your college career you want. And in August, after your senior year, if you haven't signed, you become a free agent. Baseball, you have an opportunity to be drafted 3 times, and you can still go back to college if you decide not to sign with the team. So from the league perspective, are there ways that you can make that choice more palatable to those basketball players who might want to consider, look, college isn't right for me. I don't want to go there. I'd like to go earn some money. Are there things that you can do either in the draft or with the development league in terms of offering higher salaries to perhaps provide another avenue that then mitigates the damage or the appearance of damage with the one and done rule?
Well, Warren, I think, as you so succinctly point out, all of the major pro sports have different rules. And I think for very valid reasons, because none of them are apples to apples. All of them are a little bit different. The hockey one you point out is interesting. But for us, what we found, and in 2005, we had a negotiation with our Players Association, and you always have to remember that if you have a union, there is a negotiation with your Players Association before you can make a substantive change such as that. And it was decided that no longer could high school players or players just out of high school come into the NBA, but you could not come in until after the first year. Now, how's that worked? For colleges, I think it's a disaster, because you've got a guy that comes, he plays, when his season is over, if he's going to put his name in the draft, then he quits going to school. For us, it's a lot better than kids coming out of high school. It's better from a playing standpoint for us. I think it's better for the player himself. Very, very few. There are very few LeBron James type players who at 16 years old could have played in the NBA. But the vast majority of players who are thinking about coming out, they're not physically, emotionally, or mentally ready to come into the NBA. So I think the 1 year for us is a heck of a lot better than the no years or just right out of high school. And what we would like to do is go to a 2 year. That if you go to, that you can't come out until after your sophomore year. It would be, I think, much better for the sport. It would be incredibly better for colleges. And that's what we would like to do. But again, it's a negotiation with our Players Association regarding that. And certainly that will come up soon enough.
So I've got a question for Oliver on the role of agents and advisors in that process. But before I go there, I'm going to turn to Mike. One of the flaws in the system that you've described is you've got a union and you've got a league, and they're negotiating over the terms of that industry. And any substantive change regarding entry into the draft would be collectively bargained. But missing from that discussion are all of the prospective members. And I know the union claims to represent future members, and they do, but it's never a top 10 negotiating point in a CBA. You're talking about growing and splitting the pie. Mike, your thoughts on that arrangement?
Yeah, I think those who are impacted by eligibility rules don't have someone at the bargaining table. I mean, that's clear, right? Someone who loses their eligibility because of an eligibility rule isn't a member of the union because he can't be, right, by virtue of the rule itself. So it's really a catch-22. Under labor law, I think the conventional view of labor law is that unions can bargain on behalf of those not yet in a union. Now, you could argue maybe that general framework should be altered for sports where the earnings curve is very different, right? Where the average either NFL or NBA player, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, the window of time to make money as an athlete is much more limited than it would be in a typical union relationship. And I think you're right, Warren, to point out, I mean, both of you are right. Rod's pointed out that it has to be collectively bargained. And Warren, you've noted that, who's going to be there at the table for those that are not yet in the league. And I think this is, if we did see a legal challenge to the NBA age rule, I don't think it would be just against the NBA. I think it would be against the Players Association as well. I think they would be brought in as a co-defendant if we were to see that, because the problem of only suing the NBA is that the rule has been collectively bargained. So it's, I don't know if anything's going to happen. I think we have seen some players go to Europe, although it's a very small number of players do that. Maybe the D-League salaries will go up to be a little bit more market oriented than capping them at, I think, $25,000 or whatever is the amount. So there are some changes ahead, but I agree with that tension that those who are impacted by eligibility rules have no seat at the table.
I mean, you were part of the Maurice Claret legal team way back when, and made those arguments. I wish,
they should have won, right? Those were the right arguments.
Just a bad decision, but great lawyering.
No.
So, Oliver, let me turn to you then, right? So, part of the perception of college athletics is you've got, at least again in football, men's basketball, you've got some athletes who are generating a lot of money. And those athletes are the ones who have an opportunity, in theory, to move on and go pro. Yet it appears that the NCAA, through their rules, have had limitations on their ability to evaluate their pro prospect and get proper advice in that process. So if you are a composer, if you're John Mayer and you go to school at the Berklee College of Music, right, you can go play a gig at Harvard Square and no one thinks that you're no longer a student on campus. You can sell a song for a soundtrack and no one looks at you as you're not a student. You can have an agent who can help you navigate that process. Yet in college athletics, if you are a random college football quarterback and you sign your name onto some cards, that then triggers some issues. I know there's some talk, is there some discussion about real change in that regard in terms of helping some of these students navigate a pro career?
The short answer is yes, there has been. There's, as Jim well knows, there's been a discussion that's been ongoing about, what's the proper role of an agent with an undergraduate student athlete. Mm-hmm. We certainly, I think, would all agree that we want students to know as much as they possibly can about where they fit in, given the restrictions that exist in the CBAs for the NFL or the mm-hmm. NBA or the NHL, et cetera. So there's been a good bit of discussion about, do we allow agents in earlier to discuss situations with players? Both the NBA and the NFL have been pretty good about ranking players and saying, hey, you've got a draft opportunity or you don't, son, so you better stay in school because you're not going to get drafted. Of course, you can still leave and become a free agent. So I think there's been some discussion in regards to figuring out, can we liberalize those rules, really with an emphasis on getting good information and good advice to those student athletes. Now, it's safe to say if you liberalize those rules, these kids won't be getting all good advice. There'll be a lot of very selfish advice that comes in from a number of different agents. So we've got to be careful about that as well, but there's been a good bit of discussion about that.
So what about someone who gets either bad advice or is misled or just makes a mistake? They enter their name in the draft, they don't go drafted. Any discussion about allowing those students to return?
There's been some discussion about a concept like that, almost a tryout. Mm-hmm. Right, to see, maybe you go and you see and you look and you let NBA scouts look at your skill set, and as Rod knows, a scout can probably tell pretty quickly if a player has legitimate possibility of playing professionally. So it's all about giving athletes as much information, student athletes as much information as they possibly can. So I think there has been some discussion, and I would expect over a number of years the NCAA moves at a glacial pace occasionally. So I think that there's going to be some liberalization of those rules as we go into this new era, because it's about the student athlete health and welfare. That's really the way it's been. That's the narrative right now in terms of how we could liberalize some of those rules.
Jim, let me turn to you. For the past 10, 5, 3 years, there's been all sorts of conference realignment. A lot of movement for affiliation not having to do with academics, not having to do with geography as much anymore, but joining conferences to be in a Power 5 conference, to get the television contract, largely for football. Are we through that, you think? Do you think that we're pretty well settled for the conference realignment, or do you think that there's more to come in the near future?
Well, conference realignment's been something that's been around for a long time. There was a period of time where there wasn't a lot of movement. Obviously, as you articulated, over the course of the last several years, there's been rapid changes. And I think it's a fairly accurate criticism that it was driven by finances and some of those kinds of things. I don't think we can skirt all of those things. I do feel that, you know, as I went through it in the Big Ten Conference, there was lots of reasons and rationale to do it. The financial piece of this thing is real. It just is. And Oliver talked about, you know, the $2.7 billion a year in financial aid. Besides the GI Bill, it's the largest group ever and the most amount of money given to one segment of our population. And I think as we move forward, things like access, affordability, things that really have been foundational pillars for college athletics have to remain in tow. But the financial realities are 1,100 schools playing college athletics, and 23 managed to turn a profit without some kind of subsidy from the institution. That's real. That's real. Lots of folks are with high business acumen, I think, understand that. When you're offering, like we do in college athletics, broad-based opportunities for men and for women across a broad-based spectrum of sports and athletics, the financial realities to all this is absolutely something that keeps me awake at night, kept Oliver awake at night. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that? And so conference movement has absolutely been parts of financial. The geography sometimes doesn't make sense, but it is trying to position your institution for being in the best place that it possibly can for now and to the future in this rapidly changing landscape.
But let me ask you a question. So there's two components here. One is, are schools making money? And there's some debate in terms of the accounting and everything else, what counts. And number two is, okay, well, how are we distributing that money? Because if, I think it was 23 coaches were making more than $2.5 million last year. And if a third of that money went towards your athletes, we wouldn't have some of these debates. But Mike, let me turn to you. We just celebrated the 40th anniversary of Title IX, which was remarkable legislation, 1972, had a huge impact on college athletics, Cohen versus Brown, and moving on. What role is that going to play in the future of the NCAA and college athletics? Well,
I think it will continue to play a major role. And I also think it will play a potentially limiting role to the changes that have been advocated. For instance, if a system materializes, whether it's through litigation or whether it's through the National Labor Relations Board, where male basketball players and football players are paid in one form or another, that's going to impact Title IX analysis, where female athletes are going to rightfully ask to be treated similarly under Title IX. Now, there's a lot of analysis about how Title IX is impacted by whether or not we call a student athlete an employee or whether we call him a student. And that classification actually matters significantly in terms of the Title IX analysis. But I think we will see Title IX litigation if, in fact, male basketball players and football players are either declared employees or whether, and I know we're going to talk about the Jenkins case, whether they're able to get scholarships that exceed the cost of attendance and are more market-based. I would be shocked if we don't see that type of litigation emerge.
Are there schools out there, and I'll throw this to any of you, but I assume Oliver and Jim would be the appropriate people. Are there schools out there that you're aware of that are having conversations about paying more than cost of attendance for elite athletes beyond scholarship and the cost of attendance?
I think it's safe to say that there's, certainly a handful of schools that are looking at their cost of attendance. That's a number that's not ginned up by the athletics department, comes from financial aid office.
Yep.
But on top of that is the so-called name, image, likeness, $5,000 trust fund account, which is in the order from Judge Wilkin out in Oakland, California.
Yep.
It's
The
federal
O'Bannon
law, and we certainly don't want to be in contempt of court and not implement that law. So there are a number of schools that are planning, because August 1st is the deadline, or I guess July 31st, August 1st it could go into effect. There are some folks planning out there. Put it this way, as Jim well knows, there are schools that are budgeting for that. In other words, full cost of attendance plus an additional $5,000 per year in this trust fund account per the judge's decision, or injunction, really, I should say.
I assume there's also schools that are planning for that and thinking about returning to Division III, right? I mean, because in theory, you could have open markets, right? I mean, that's at least if the Jenkins case wins. Oh, Mike, why don't you tell us about the Jenkins case in terms of what's looming out there in the horizon as this potential grenade to intercollegiate athletics if the Jenkins case is successful?
Sure. So in very brief recap, the Jenkins case is a case brought by Martin Jenkins and other college players who are arguing that an athletic scholarship, which is capped at a certain number, room, board, tuition, room and books, cost of attendance, that number shouldn't be capped, that it should be based on the market. And the argument is, it's an antitrust argument. The argument is to say the NCAA and its member schools have joined hands in a conspiracy to limit the amount of money that could exist in an athletic scholarship. So think of the best college athlete, and what would that athlete get if schools could compete for him or her? That's the essential argument. And it's appealing to many because it would be a market-based approach. On the other hand, there are many who are concerned by it, that if colleges are going to pay a market-based approach, it would be inconsistent with the idea that they're students. And it would also potentially raise the costs of college sports so that some schools would have to cut programs, some schools would go to Division III, and I think that it would invite questions of, who are the beneficiaries of this type of litigation? Is it a tiny portion of players who are really the stars, but when the vast majority of student athletes may in fact, not have value above the value of an athletic scholarship? So. It's certainly, as a law professor, it's a really interesting case to study. But also as an educator, there are things about it that are appealing, but there are things that are concerning too. And I think that if it is successful, it's a game changer. While O'Bannon leads to $5,000 per year held in a trust fund, as Oliver noted, assuming the Ninth Circuit doesn't reverse, right? This case is on appeal, so we have to wait to see on that. But if Jenkins prevails, it changes everything.
And so you could have a 7-foot center being recruited, getting paid more than a minimum wage in your league, and a 6'8" left tackle. But you also, the flip side, I think you point this out, the 12th person on the Northwestern men's basketball team may be getting far less than a full athletic scholarship and cost of attendance at an elite private institution. So there's wins and losses just for the athletes, let alone the impact on the industry. I want to save enough time for the audience questions. So let me ask this last question of each of you. Where do you think college athletics will be in 5 or 10 years? What does the system, what do we look like? What does college athletics look like in 5 or 10 years? Oliver, I'll start with you.
Number one, I think it looks very healthy. With all the doom and gloom that we've discussed, keep in mind for the college football playoff, first time this year, those 3 games, the 2 semifinals and the finals, were the highest rated cable TV shows in the history of cable television. I'm sure next year's games will one-up those. So I think the game is very healthy. All the games are very healthy. I think we'll continue to see a liberalization of some of the restrictions that heretofore have been on student athletes and those types of things. I don't want to say compensation or consideration or payments, but those types of things that we can provide them. And I think most importantly, we'll see, as Jim has pointed out, a recalibration of the importance of the educational aspect of this whole thing, right? We want, every athletic director wants, I think all of us in this room would want every one of our student athletes to take a rigorous academic workload, walk away from their 4 or their 5 years with a degree, so that person is prepared for life. And I think we'll see a renewed emphasis on making sure that academically we're doing the right thing for all these kids.
Mike?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we'll see, to me, I think the O'Bannon model, this idea of a trust where money is earned while in school but received after school, is something of a compromise that I think appeals to a lot of people. The student athlete will get some compensation for their name, image, and likeness rights, but it doesn't emerge while they're in school, so that it doesn't either jeopardize, however you want to put it, the sort of traditional model. I think that $5,000 could be a higher figure, and I could see some conferences deciding, assuming they're able to negotiate these rules with the NCAA, having a higher than $5,000 number. But I would be surprised if 5 years from now we're in a world where college athletes are essentially professional athletes, where they're negotiating contracts between universities. It's possible, but I think that would be a very different idea of college sports than what we have.
Do you see the name, likenesses, and images discussion happening at a macro level or a conference level or an individual level? If we heard Sue Bird this morning eloquently talk about her experiences, would an elite athlete like her be able to negotiate with Nike individually, even if that money got put into trust? Or are we talking about, no, this is what the conference or the NCAA would decide?
I don't think we're going to see that. I think we're more likely to see a cap on what a player can negotiate, and that the negotiation would come through a trade association that's in partnership with universities and with the conferences and the NCAA. I think all of these parties that are at war with each other will eventually get together and work something out, because it's in all of their interest to do so. I don't think we're going to see continuous war with litigation and challenges under the National Labor Relations Act. At some point, it just makes sense that they all get in the same room and strike a deal.
Jim, your thoughts?
Without maybe duplicating some of the comments by my peers to the right, I guess I would say maybe what my hope is. And my hope is that college returns to college athletics and student returns to student athlete. And I hope that because of all the noise that's going on in the industry right now, we can tighten lots of things up in college athletics. And I just really believe that college athletics does not and should not be for everybody coming out of high school. It should be one of a variety of options for young men and women at the age of 18 when they finish high school. It should not be the only choice for them. If they want to come and get an education in higher education and come on a college campus and be a student and also play a sport, tremendous. But if your dream and aspiration is to play professionally, you shouldn't have to necessarily come to college in order to achieve that. And so I hope that we'll be able to partner in the right way with those organizations and industries that allow folks a choice. Maybe they should go to IMG and go train in Florida or anywhere else, Bradenton or anywhere else for a year or 2 or 3, and then go check out the professional options. But to be force-fed at times to accept students that maybe don't want to be on your college campuses, that's what I hope we can change. That's one piece of it. The second piece of it is I hope we can do more for our kids. I just do. It's what we love about being on a college campus. It's what we believe, what's right in America with higher education. And I hope we can do more and make their experiences better for them at a very critical age between 18 and 22.
More academics, more of a larger role for education in the process. And a great segue to Rod in terms of other opportunities for athletes who may not want to go to college. You are the sole representative of the professional leagues up here. Your thoughts on ways that the leagues might be able to provide those opportunities in ways that perhaps we're not today?
Well, I think firstly, I want to comment on what my colleagues have just commented on, and that is, I think obviously there are going to be some changes. Exactly what they are, I don't think any of us really know. Hopefully, that litigation that is presently ongoing, the cooler heads will get together, and as all of the panelists have said, come to logical conclusions that are good for the athlete. That's what I hope for. As far as, we have the NBDL that has been talked talked about briefly now, that serves as a minor league for the NBA. We've had a few players, who have can't play in college, who have gone to the NBA, rather than staying in college. That may play more of a factor. I think what Jim just said is very interesting, in that there are some kids who do not belong in college. They're strictly there to play. They have no interest in the academic side of the institution, and maybe there is a way that they can go to, to some place and practice their craft as an athlete and segue themselves into, whatever sports league, they're trying to get in. I think that definitely has some validity, and maybe, something along those lines is what we may see. On a personal level, it's very interesting to me, this Power Five, these Power Five conferences who now are sort of on their own in certain instances, obviously not in every case, but what's going to happen with them? It's such a small portion, of the total, but they have, they're such a powerful block. What's going to happen with them? I'm anxious to see, all of us and all of you, what is going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. I think it's really tough to, tough to evaluate right now.
So that leads perfectly to the first question that has come from the audience with a whole bunch of votes, which is heightening this difference between the haves and the have-nots. So the first question here talks about is, does UAB dropping football, is this the beginning of other non-Power 5 schools dropping that sport as being too expensive and not getting the revenue that they would generate if they were in a Power 5 conference? Are we going to see a lot more schools dropping football, do we think?
I don't think so. I think every situation is unique. UAB had its own issues because of the oversight from the Alabama State Board of Trustees. So I don't know if that is necessarily a harbinger of other football programs to come. I think we have to be sensitive to that, but I don't personally, I don't think that's the case.
Jim, you agree with that?
I hope so. Yeah, I hope that we don't end up going down the road of limiting opportunities, both not only in football but in broad-based programming, opportunities that really mean a lot for young people. Listen, I think the college athletics opportunity is sensational. I mean, when I look at what we spend on our student athletes, 492 student athletes across 19 sports, 11 female sports, 8 male sports. We're over $800,000 across the board, basically, in support. Maybe it's grant and aid, maybe it's housing, maybe it's food, maybe it's academic services, maybe it's sports medicine, maybe it's travel. I think that's a pretty good deal. I think that's a really pretty good deal. And so I really hope that whatever recorrection we have, that it doesn't limit opportunities overall.
Well, that leads beautifully into another question that we have here, which is several of you have talked eloquently about the value of intercollegiate athletics, why we have it, why it's good as an educational tool, the opportunities it provides. But why do we continue to give athletic scholarships? Doesn't that experience, those transformative skills, aren't they just as easily learned under a Division III model where we could offer, let's say we just decide to offer need as opposed to grant? What is it that, I was a really bad Division III athlete, what was it that experience didn't teach me that an elite, full scholarship, cost of attendance student is getting that I missed? Other than, I guess, the ability for media training?
That's an excellent question, and I think that the differences are minimal. I've had a daughter that went to Stanford, played volleyball there, was on scholarship for a couple of years and off scholarship for a couple of years. I'm not sure that her experience was any different when dad was writing the check or when the university was picking up that cost. So all those lessons that we talked about with teamwork and discipline in learning how to pick yourself up after a defeat, and learning how to win graciously. I think all of those were there, whether she was on scholarship or she wasn't. So it's a very fair question to ask. And as the financial pressures become more acute on campus, I could certainly see some discussion around that topic of, do we need to have need-based aid for some of our sports? It's a very fair question.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that? No, we're going with Oliver's response. Well done. What does any of this reform mean potentially with some of the changes that we hear are coming down the pike or that have already been imposed for the non-revenue/Olympic sports, right? These are sports that we've seen Title IX take a bite out of on the men's side, with wrestling and a bunch of other sports being curtailed. What does it mean to those sports and the opportunities that might be available for the students who are interested in competing in that arena?
I mean, I think they're somewhat on the sidelines right now, right? When you look at the litigation that's been brought, we're looking at typically football players and male basketball players. Now, with some of the concussion litigation, there are other athletes who have been part of it, and the litigation against UNC is being brought by a broader group of former athletes, student athletes. But I think to a large extent, many of the Olympic athletes are not really participants in the litigations and some of the other legal efforts that have been brought, but they're clearly impacted by whatever rules emerge over the next few years. And I think we could see the next phase of legal challenges be Olympic athletes and others who are playing, non-revenue generating sports.
One of the tensions that has come out of this debate has clearly been the role of academics at the college Division I revenue-producing sports. We've had some issues at some schools with academic standards, with students and trying to figure out what they're majoring in and separating them, athletes from the general population, fake classes, et cetera. How do we reconcile that component in terms of maintaining eligibility for students who may not have the aptitude to engage? And also, is this a sign of, as the question says, is this a sign that the cost to win has become just too much at the college level? Are we chasing money at the cost of educating our students? We get an interesting lawsuit at North Carolina, right? We've got some former athletes who are claiming that the school breached their contract on promising to educate them. Now, I don't know what role the student played in skipping classes and then filing this lawsuit, but Jim, thoughts on, your institution leads the league in the top 2 or 3 every year, graduation rates. We're right there with Boston College and Stanford and Duke and Notre Dame.
And UNH.
And UNH.
Thank you.
That's right.
Well done.
We are.
They have a fantastic football.
Not West Virginia.
Yeah, where are we? Where are we, Ron? Oh, my goodness.
Jim, your thoughts on sort of that academic tension and how to rectify that? We've got the APR, which is better than it was, but sure isn't a great evaluation of standards. How do we reintegrate the academic component? Because I think everyone in this panel who believes fervently in intercollegiate athletics and competing at the Division I level, right? The Power 5 conferences feel that academics has got to be a priority, or else we've lost the entire system.
I'm just really hopeful, as I mentioned earlier, things like year of readiness, initial eligibility requirements, progress towards degree, practice and playing, those are all parts of where and how we get to a better destination. And listen, I would tell you, shame on us as an enterprise and as an industry, because we have allowed certain things to take place. We have made certain decisions on our campuses individually that may have not been or are not in the best interest of the student athletes. Just because somebody wants to come to college, are they ready to come to college? Are they ready to handle the requirements necessary to be a productive citizen on our college campuses, to really thrive and grow and prosper academically? And I think, again, part of that is on us, and I feel a deep sense of responsibility as one of the directors of athletics in an environment that needs change, that needs reform. But I'm hopeful, I'm really hopeful with the direction of the NCAA, with Oliver's leadership, with us talking about it on our individual campuses at the conference level. There's never been more debate or conversation than that's going on right now. That's why I think it's healthy with some of the things that have been brought and risen to the surface. And so those are individual institutional decisions, and we need to be held accountable for those individual institutional decisions. But either graduation rates matter or they don't. Either academic standards matter or they don't. There's really not necessarily a gray area. And so the hope continues to be reform. Let's pay attention to the essential pieces of what we believe the college experience should be.
And I'd like to just add that, because I think Jim makes an excellent point. It's not as simple as saying NCAA, set a standard, and below that standard you can't get into school. Every university is different. Mm-hmm. They serve different missions. A land-grant university like ours is different than a private school in Evanston, in Illinois, and it's different than a public school up in the Northeast. So there's different systems, there's different research capabilities, there's different missions, and it's not all the same. So it's very difficult, I think, at the national level to say, here's a cutoff, because that cutoff would have a much different effect depending on what campus you're at.
But don't you think you could have some sort of proportionality where I fervently agree with you that every institution is different and serves different students, and it's important that all of those constituencies are served and that those needs are met. So what about some proportionality level where you've got the average graduation rate of your student body vis-a-vis your athletes, and if that gap is too large, right? If you're at a small land-grant or non-academically rigorous institution, right, and the student body graduation rate's at 65%, they shouldn't be held to the same graduation levels for their athletes as Northwestern would hold. Is that something that might make sense moving forward?
Yeah, I think that has some merit, certainly, because, again, every institution serves a different need.
Part of my follow-up, Jim, for your point, which I think is outstanding in terms of this discussion, but every school has to make their own decisions. I think part of the challenge, which is something that Rod doesn't find in his league, is that far too often the decisions for institutions is made at the head coach level, as opposed to an athletic or president decision, right? I think that I read something that 40 of the highest paid employees in 40 of the 50 states in the country are athletic coaches, men's basketball or football. So if you think about where decisions are made and where the power vests, right, can you imagine your coaches making decisions for your league and the owners going along with those decisions?
In all due respect to our coaches, we'd be in a lot of trouble.
Which is where we are for college athletics today.
That reminds me of that great line by Babe Ruth when he was told that he made more money that particular year than the President of the United States. He said, well, I had a better season.
He definitely had a better
Making
season.
75.
Yeah, exactly.
And I wonder how his recruiting would have gone today and where he would wound up. One of the things that I find refreshing as someone who's been critical of college sports and their lack of transparency is, quite frankly, some of the people who are coming to have this debate in public. Because for too long, these discussions have been ignored, or the NCAA has said, we've got this, don't worry about it. And I think people like Jim and Oliver and others are leading the charge so that we can have genuine discussion and debate so that the best outcome for our students, welfare, academics, health, is taken care of. So I applaud your efforts on moving reform discussions away from behind closed doors into the public. It will be exciting to see where we are in 5 years. We'd love to come back in 5 or 10 years and see which of us were right. I assume all of us. I thank you for your time and for your joining us on this panel today.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Warren.
Thank you.